Oh, uh-oh. Gonna start a fire. Don't start a fire, please. Ooh, nice. Oops. Should have been this side. Whoops. I've messed that up. Should be able to put it in here, slide it all the way up, and maybe back just a little bit. So now with this, I should be able to put the knife in the vise and then pound this down onto it. The only problem is, and that's the cleaner looking side. Uh-oh. Crap. Oh, that worked. Somewhat. Okay, kind of fit up the. Oops. What kind of fit up the gives this? Ooh, actually, that's not bad. It's a pretty damn good fit. Might just need to do some minor filing, but that went a lot smoother than the last one that I tried to punch, because actually now I have a proper punch for this. So it gives it a really close fit. There's a slight gap right there, but that can be kind of tapped shut afterwards. And that whole guard piece hanging off the end, I think I'm going to take that off, because this is going to be kind of a puko knife, which doesn't have a guard, and there's really no need for it. So yeah, it's awesome. Alright, I rounded over the corners on the tang, and you even round it all the way up to the shoulder here. That way the fitting can fit a little bit better, because when you punch or file or anything like that, it's so hard to get a perfect 90-degree angle that I don't even bother. And with this here, I ground off the face, and then I used the peen of a hammer, of a ball peen hammer, to hammer this this inner edge kind of inwards, which creates a small lip that is smaller than the tang up here, but it's so thin that I was just able to hammer it down onto the shoulders again, and after a little bit of shimmying, I get a pretty good fit all the way around here. So now what's left to do is I can use the blade itself as a jig, because the fit is really nice and tight on here, so I can just use a 36 grit belt and hold the blade by the tang and by the blade itself, and then kind of shape the bolster that way. I'm going for kind of an oval shape, maybe about that high up, and then about the same amount below the edge, and then it'll have a handle. So we'll see how it goes. Now I don't have a good light set up here yet, so this video will be a little bit dark. This is the bolster now. You can see that it's really thin at the top here. That's because the back of the bolster is actually wider, so that it's easier to fit the tang. So thankfully I didn't grind it down too much. So let's see how this fits up. Okay, fits well. And so now it's like it's kind of thin, but it's meant to be that way because the handle is going to start as thin as the bolster here, and then it will swell up towards the middle and then go back down at the tang. And I need to make a butt plate for this because this is going to be a wedge tenon design knife as well. So I'll get to that. The way that this bolster punching works is that the punch itself is tapered. So let's say you have a piece of bolster material here, and then the punch that goes through it has a taper to it. When you punch the hole, it kind of has this, a more narrow section and a wider section, and your blade is what goes through this narrow section, narrow section first. And when it goes through this narrow section, it deforms a lot easier in this area, and also it stays a bit tighter to the tang as well, so that when I'm using that pipe and I'm hammering it onto the tang and bringing it to the shoulders of the tang, it kind of goes a lot more smooth. Now, when you're looking at it this way, so let's say this is the bolster, and then here's the tapered hole in there. See, give it a little bit more of a taper here. So here's your hole. And one thing that I noticed when punching these bolsters is that it's actually width doesn't matter, really. It doesn't matter how far away you are from the tang on the sides, but what really matters is the distance from the spine to the bottom of the tang. And if it's not quite there, if it's too narrow and it doesn't fit on probably 95% of the way, 90% of the way even, it's going to be really hard for the steel to stretch out this way. But if it's too narrow or too wide here, it's not as hard for the blade to kind of press everything out this way. So usually when I'm hot punching these, even when I fit it to the tang, it's not quite there, or it still has kind of a gap along it, like this part is kind of bowed out like that. That's kind of exaggerated, but there's a gap on either side, and I don't want that. So what I end up doing is slide the bolster on while it's hot, maybe to about there, and then I use my hammer and hammer down on the sides evenly, and then that closes up the hole. And by the time it's hammered down, it's lost too much of its heat already. So I go ahead and put it in the vise, so the vise kind of holds it like that, and then I hammer on the tang, which takes the blade out and leaves behind the bolster. So after that, I heat up the bolster again because it's not wide enough to fit all the way up on the tang like this. I heat it up and then fit it on there again. And this time it's a really nice fit. However, even then you still get a little bit of a space. What I do after that, this is kind of after it's heat treated and all the cold work begins, I just take a ball peen hammer and then hammer in the edges here so it creates a really small lip. that is smaller than the tang itself, but it's really easy to move it out of the way. So I just put the knife in a vise again, and it doesn't take that much force or effort to slide it back onto the shoulders, and this time it has a really good fit up. For example, this one had kind of a gap all the way around it, and then I took it off, hammered in the edges, pressed it back on. I might end up having to do that again because this blade isn't heat treated, and then once I grind this down, it might kind of pull away from this area and create a gap again, so I need to watch out for that. What I do is I just kind of put it on the grinder, grind it down so the whole thing is flat, fit it up again, and because you're grinding off, a slight amount off the surface, it's not going to fit the same, of course, so you might need to do a little bit of file work inside, possibly, but for the most part, I've found that it's pretty easy to just kind of hammer back onto the blade again, and it usually works. And then once you hammer it back on, you can check to see if it fits again, and then if it doesn't, go back and repeat that process how many ever times you want. So now I have all of the fittings, both the bolster and butt plate, all fitted up to the tang on these knives, and all that's left is to heat treat, grind them, and then the rest is handle work.